supervisors to order, please. Please rise. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please, followed by remain standing, followed by a moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will have the reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned organizational meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse, Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, Wausau, on Tuesday, August 27, 2019, at 7 p.m. to consider the following items as were listed on the agenda, and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. I would like to request everyone please silence your cell phones or put them on vibrate as to not to interrupt the meeting. And thank you. We will move on to roll call. I would request that all supervisors please sign in. Supervisor Robinson, please sign in.
He just wants to know where his president is.
I thank you. We'll proceed. I'd like to welcome all the visitors that we have tonight to the county board meeting, and also extend a warm welcome to the visitors that are watching via television. And moving on, we will move to item B, education presentation and reports. And we have item number 7, progress report on the 2019 administrative work plan by the administrator, Mr. Carter.
The microphone's working out. The plan is in your packet, but you went in, I think, just a day or so ago because you forgot. Can you hear me?
Nope.
Microphone's not working. Is that better?
There we go.
Okay, now I'll talk real loud to go with it. It's in the packet. You may have to download again because it came in just a couple of days ago. I thought sure it was in there, but I forgot to send it over, so that didn't help. I'm going to go fast because the chair told me we don't have a lot of time for this. But it's still important, and I want you to spend some time with that. I've organized it by committee, so you can listen to it differently that way. Starting off with Education, Economic Development Committee. That's too long a name, but we'll fix that some other day. We talked about the field house and the pool over at UW-Stevens Point, Wausau. And I did quite a bit of looking into that myself, and what I found was the pool is really underutilized. I mean, we're going to try to keep the student population at UW-Stevens Point up, and if you close the pool, it'll look like you're going out of business. May save you a little bit of money, but it'll be detrimental to the success of the school. But what we've done is we've now worked with the Parks Department. If we're going to pay for a pool, let's use it. Let's invite the community. Let's find ways to use the pool. The day I visited it, there was a lifeguard in there, and that was it. So we got to make sure that we publicize it, that the public know that they can use it. It's not just for swimming lessons for the Green Dolphins or the YMCA programs. It's for the community, and we're going to put some good effort into getting that to be used. I'll talk more about the university in a minute. Broadband access, we got great success there. We got Design 9. They've conducted community meetings. I thought that they went well. We're actually timed well. We'll have the report before the end of the year, but I put down end of the year anyway because something always happens at the end. But we will definitely have it by the end of the year. And this new state budget has a lot more money for broadband. Not near enough as it should have, but a lot more than it had in the past. So you really can't qualify for these grants unless you have a plan in place. And my belief is that we'll have a fiber ring around it because that's how every plan I read in preparation for this has it, and that there'll be other ways too to reach certain areas. So I think it'll be a good plan that will help us qualify for money, help us target where we make those investments. Also identify where people are not only interested in having internet service, but they're willing to pay for it because you have to do both. That's broadband access. Student population, and I'm on page 2 now at UW. It's down this fall, It's been down every year for a long period of time, and that is very worrisome. I'm very worried about that. I don't know what we can do to improve it. The university, I think, has done some good steps. I was there when they had 3 days in a row. They had junior high students from the metro area coming there, seeing the program, meeting the faculty, had large programs for them, so they're actually recruiting in junior highs where at the junior high level where people are really making those decisions. I thought they were great programs. You see more advertising than ever before. They have the best faculty you'll find anywhere. And people need to get that word out. One of the big impediments that we're in control of is student housing. When the Education and Economic Development Committee looked at the pool, they were surprised how nice it was. But student housing is not up to industry standards. And I've gone through this with Dean Montgomery when he was still working there. It cannot pay for itself on student fees. It's too small, no matter how much you project that. So I don't see any way to fix that unless we're going to stick levy into it. You can't stick levy into something where you're that uncertain about its future. But I'm telling you, the student housing was built in the 60s. Certainly wasn't built for internet, certainly wasn't built for a lot of things. Actually, it was built for 4-H during the fair. That was the primary purpose of it, and now utilized as dormitories. It's certainly served its purpose, but that is an impediment that we have to talk about if we're going to invest in a long-term future of this. I just don't have an idea how we fix that right now. Mine environmental resources, I'm going through these fast, and if you want to talk about them more depth, you just let me know and we'll talk more. Environmental resources, the POUTS program will expire at the end of this year, and by October 1st, we'll be taking applications here for our plant. Now, the way we're going to do it is you take out a loan, it's like $10,000 to $12,000. Rather than have us horsing around with $12 a month payments, it just gets attached to the land. When the land changes property, then we get paid back. That's better, because people don't have to worry about it. There's money on the table when the house changes hands. The downside is you could run out of money, you see, because you're not getting paid back until all these loans come back. So that's a downside to the way we're planning on doing it, but I think given all the things that considerations we're taking into account, it costs us $20 to receive a $12 payment if you know the real cost. It doesn't really make sense to do that for such a small amount. And we could get somebody else to do that for us, but I think attaching it to the property is the best way. If the money runs out, eventually it'll replenish. Maybe at some point we have to put levy into it. If it's important enough, maybe that's what we have to do to oversee it for a short period. Executive committee, page 3. This is that outside funding thing. And I can tell you, I worked with a number of the standing committees. This whole idea of what we can do less and what we can do without is not going well. And I don't have any better advice. I'm no better than you are. I mean, it's like, okay, we got some low priorities, but when we look at them, we still want them. We don't have useless programs. So let me talk about the second piece of this, which is cost recovery. This isn't going well either, but I think I have a good idea. The idea is that the board group all the things that we charge fees for, should charge fees for, and group them, those that are 100% personal benefit, we charge 100% of the cost. Not $25, okay? Not just some artificial number. We calculate through cost accounting. We'd have to develop the skills to do that. It's your benefit, that. If something's 50% a personal benefit, 50% public benefit, well, we charge 50% of the cost. But rather than doing what we're doing now, which is the committee chair says, we haven't increased the rates in 7 years, and it's $25, and I heard some other county got it 30, let's make it that. That's not a process. See, if we say you're going to calculate what the real cost is, and you're going to determine which percentage, and I don't know how you're going to make it fine, but I certainly 50, 100, maybe 75%, and you leave it to the staff every year, take a look at what your cost is, and just up them. Not committee votes, not a lot of other things. Our policy is it'd be 50% of the cost of this. We figure out what the cost is, that's what it is. So it would create a lot of upset. People who pay fees feel like they pay taxes, they shouldn't have to pay fees. But remember, your levy is capped. It's going to go up some, not enough to cover your cost of continuing service. If you don't do this, what are you going to do to keep up with costs? You can't just cut your way to the top. You're going to have to do something different. And it strikes me that when you have a benefit that's 75% personal, why should the other 29,000 people pay for you? So I've talked to this a number of committees. It's gone over like the proverbial lead balloon, but we're going to keep talking about it because I think it's important, and maybe mine's not a good idea, and I'm perfectly willing if somebody else has a better idea to go with that. But we have to come up with some ideas because these levy caps are not going away. They're not going away. They're a reality of life. We're just going to have to find a way to deal with them. Renovating North Central Healthcare Campus, we're on our way. I mean, it's in the design stages. Lance did a great job with the neighborhood concerns. We had the FAA issue. We had the city issue where the mayor voted no. The design is ready. The path is cleared. Going to be great. Connected to that is the aquatic therapy pool. We had the groundbreaking ceremony. Weather couldn't have been worse. Well, I guess it could have been worse, but it was still awful. Awful for a groundbreaking. I talked to a number of the people from Warm Water. They love the design. They're looking forward to it. I don't think there's any issue there. I think it's going to be terrific. Can't wait for the ribbon cutting. Long-term facilities plan. We've talked about this for years, and I just gave you a little preview. Here's what we have learned. Mr. Butke and I and some other people are working on this process. I've been through 2 renditions of this in 30 years, and it was always came out that we're going to need 10 to 12% more space over the next decade. That's about what it's turned out to be. Now we need less. Remember when the library built the 3rd floor because it was going to need all that extra space, and then the way you communicate information changed and now we need less space? It's happening in all of our systems. And what the long-term plan, I think, will call for is abandoning River Drive, abandoning Thomas Street, centralizing with a new land purchase, maybe on that end of the community, but maybe not. The parks and highway, so we can have a fleet operation where departments, sheriff's department, they don't own vehicles, they pay to use them from the fleet, be a lot more economical, used by the city right now with great success, and expanding down at North Central Healthcare with social services and some other departments, and the courthouse. And then we wouldn't need those other 2 sites in the community. So that's what I see coming. It'll be a great conversation. The North Central Healthcare Campus, was about $73 million. The Forensic Science Center, I'll talk about. Highway shop, we're talking about $37 million. The jail and courthouse, I've seen it $75 million. I've seen $150 million. I decided to put $100 million because that seemed like a nice round number. I have no idea what a new jail, it depends on how big a jail, where, what you want it used for. But let me tell you, it's a lot. I've got all kinds of people saying, don't put $2 million into fixing this jail, just put that money towards a new one. Okay, I don't think they have any idea what the scale of the differences are. But if you're going to build a new jail, it's going to be a lot, especially if you're building it 5 years out. Funding, this is one where I still need help. A funding policy for capital improvements. I talked to the priority-based budgeting people. They had a network, and I asked them to send me the best policies. And the best policies that came back, people that were most proud of it, were exactly the policy we used to have. Taking young fund balance, auditing it, and using that to buy capital. Unfortunately, it's not enough for us. We're not keeping up that way. So that's what came back so far. We're going to get new financial advisors. And I'm hoping these new financial advisors have some good ideas. But right now, I'm kind of at a loss. But we can't keep doing what we've been doing unless we're really going into a borrowing mode instead of saying we're just borrowing for capital. That's what most of the companies that are doing priority-based budgeting are doing. They're just saying, capital is just set aside and they're borrowing for it. But we've tried to keep it where we're using our operational money because borrowing costs more money. So we'll continue to talk about that. It's still an important conversation. I don't think there's going to be an easy answer emerge. Compensation policy, 2 issues emerged during the year. The airport director or airport people have some stellar employees over there. And they feel boxed in by the county's policies, that they couldn't give them the increases that they really deserve, and they're afraid of losing really top talent as a result of the restrictions that we're putting on it, because we're thinking about the whole system, they're just thinking about the airport. But you got to be careful with that. Because there are times where the county has a lot more money in the airport too. Because when there's a recession, the airport's revenues they're a lot more recession sensitive than the county. So what we decided to do, or we're proposing, I talked over with the Human Resources Committee, and I'll be drafting up something, is that we're going to set aside some money for top performers. Take our regular money, I'll set aside in the budget something for top performers that are below the midpoint, and you'd be able to apply that to people who are below the midpoint, but still in that top 5–10% of performers, so that we make sure we keep the best talent that we have here. I just don't know any other way. When I started the merit pay increase, I had 85 managers in the system, of which 4 had worked in a private sector environment. So we didn't have a lot of pay for performance experience. So we met with the executives from Aspirus, Liberty, or it was Wausau Insurance at the time, and Greenheck, and they said, you gotta have some extra money. You can't just implement the plan, because things will come up, unique circumstances, they won't fit in your boxes. So I'm planning on putting aside some money, and how it gets used, I'll have to develop that on the fly, but we wanna make sure it's fair, that it's targeted, that it's a real good business investment. The other thing is that the airport manager and library director were really limited to 2% every year because they're stuck. So what we're talking about doing is, with the consent of the boards, popping them into the rest of the department directors and letting the county administrator determine where they go. Now, whether the boards that have complained about this will let go of that. If they don't, they'll go back to 2%. I don't have a better solution for that. But we've talked about that. I think that's the best. That's not perfect. You know, when you have a pay-for-performance system, it sure be nice to have 5 to 7% increases. But we don't have that kind of money. And we don't want to go back to everybody just gets paid the same based on time. So, you know, it is what it is, and we'll do the best with what we have to work with. Page 5, nonprofits. You probably read in city pages, but I asked the executive committee to reconsider and give me some advice. It's still my decision, but I can tell you right now I'm going to take the advice of the executive committee, and that is all of the nonprofits will be reduced by 25% for next year. The new programs, which is a civil court mediation, the homeless teen shelter, the literacy education, the committee said put them in if you can find a dollar for dollar offset in somewhere else in the budget. So there's no new money for it. If this saves you $50,000 in something, or whatever it is, $15,000 somewhere else, transfer that money over, but that's it. So that will, you know, I've already been talking to some of the directors who read that because that came out, I hadn't anticipated that would be in the paper, and it came out before I got a chance to talk to them. The next one, conduct education on budget issues. I'm going to talk to the executive committee about this one more time. We've got, starting in September, the diversity education, which I expect to take about an hour per month, and I'm not sure that we're not crowding that out. And there'll be a lot of people here who probably aren't interested in some training on the budget. So maybe instead of training everybody, some of which don't need it, some of which are not interested, maybe I could just organize with proper posting and stuff, a session for those that are. And make sure that they start on an even keel and are able to participate at a high level in the budget. Accomplish still the same goal with less time from people who are not interested. I'm on page 6 now. I'm not sure that's the right page, but it seems like it is. Oh, the broadband, we've already covered that. It just shows up on 2 committees. I wanted to make sure that that was referenced. A long-range plan for road and bridge construction. This is still important, but it's not going to just happen. What's wrong? Oh, I thought you were, okay. You know, the way I understand it, following it from a secondary, is we've got a lot more emphasis on all-season roads for economic development purposes. We got a lot more push from more urban people for a bicycle pass. You know, the increased costs are now making this program harder, you know, so somewhere along the line we have to decide, what are we doing about bicycles? What are we doing about all-season roads? What are we doing about this, and what are the financial implications of that? I'm not expecting this is something you can do in a couple of months. I think this is a long, hard conversation, because I think that that's important, and certainly a huge price tag associated with it, but I think that the committee needs to chip away at that. A uniform addressing, I think about done talking about that. Let's get Rib Mountain done and be done. Secure detention, I was hoping that we could raise more money out of that by being more entrepreneurial and inviting more kids from other counties to come and pay so that it offsets our costs. But those revenues have not improved. The Public Safety Committee has raised the fees, and I'm hard pressed to know what to do at this time. Because I think from an economic perspective, you would close our facilities and farm our kids out to other places. And I think that would save us money. It wouldn't be as good, but it would save us money if you just look at it from an economic perspective, because kids need to be closer to their families, have them visit, have contact, so it wouldn't be as good. The problem is, I also think this 17-year-olds are going back into the system, and then we're gonna need that place. Well, good luck closing it and hiring a bunch of people. I don't know what to do. I think it's just too uncertain now to make any bold decisions, and we need to just plug along with what we're doing. Police communications channel, that is my top priority. We are going to bring 2 positions this year. It was left last year. We need 6 positions, and you got to find it somewhere. Well, 6 positions, not that easy to find. But we think we found enough money out of jail placements. Now, here's what I need you to understand. The Sheriff's Department has really worked with a lot of other players to reduce the number of people who are in jail. More people on electronic monitoring, more people on alternative programs, more emphasis on everything. But the Sheriff's Department is only one piece of a broad puzzle. Okay, so they're afraid for me to say, well, I'm gonna take it out of county jail and it's gonna work here. That'll work as long as the whole system keeps working towards that goal. And I think that they will, and we're gonna build confidence in that, but it's never one department. It's the district attorney, and it's a public defenders, and it's a whole bunch of people that are involved in the justice system, the judges themselves. We've got to move people through it fast, and we've got to save there, because that's the easiest place to save, to fund the opening the new police line. Now, I've got a lot of people saying, you can open the new police line, just do it during a power shift when there's the most police calls. The problem is, if an officer's on that, now we're not broadcasting on it, he may think we are. You know what I mean? Let's say we're on it till 2 in the morning, but then we get off. We gotta make dang sure everybody who's on that public safety network knows we're not there anymore. So that's not that easy to do. So really, until we get to 6, we're not gonna be able to open up that line so we can open it 24 hours. Great partnerships are regional morgue. One smart thing we came up with was we don't call it the morgue anymore. The neighbors in the 1st district don't like the word morgue. They like forensic science center. They think that sounds cool. I think it sounds cool too, but it's the same thing. So, here's the deal. We have now worked with the Whiffley accountants, Kim Heller being one, and other names escaped me, from Milwaukee, where they happen to be experts in nursing home evaluations. They didn't have a morgue evaluation expert. Who knew? But we are literally going to be willing to serve from Wausau to Marinette all the way north. Now they're all driving past us to go to Milwaukee or Madison to the UW. It's just not a good situation right now. We can cover the operational costs with all of our estimates. We can't cover the capital costs. And I won't let it be ask you to cover the capital costs, because that would be a subsidy to the northern third of the state. They've got to get in the game. So I met with Jeff Stubbe, who's a past CEO of Whiffley. Now he's the executive director of I think which foundation it is, Dwight and Linda Davis Foundation. And he said, forget about asking for foundations until the counties have some money in the game. They're not going to give you money if you don't put anything in yourself for the capital. So the next step has to be getting the counties that are saying they want to be part of this to put some money into it. Membership priority, I'm not sure how that would go, but they have to put some money in. We'll be the owner. We may have to put in more, because we'll ultimately own the capital asset, at least the way it's envisioned now. Then it is possible we could get a local foundation like the Davis Foundation to match what will come out of the north. But the primary benefit is north of us. It's a lot further from Iron County to Madison than it is from here. So they get the primary, so we're looking at a foundation that serves the north, that is out of the Howard Young Medical Center called the Elizabeth Taylor Fund. And those that are my age, you know that Elizabeth Taylor is Cleopatra, and if you're Al Opal's age, you think of her as National Velvet. And if you're in your 30s, you never heard of her. So, but she was a really big movie star, and she is Howard Young's niece or something like that. So she's related to up there. So the way I'm thinking about this now is if we can get the counties, including us, to say we're committed to half of this, I think the foundations could raise the rest of the capital, the thing could pay for itself, and then we're off and running. But it's really, you know, when you're talking about building a business and having a business plan with this many players, it's a very difficult process. I think I'm done.
Okay, any questions for the administrator on his work plan and reports and the progress that he's provided to the board? Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For that POUTS, do you charge interest on those loans? I mean, if you borrow $10,000 now, and do you pay $10,000 back 20 years from now? Is there interest?
No, there's interest, low interest. So we're going to charge the same as the state does. We're going to mirror exactly what the state does now. I can't remember what it is, but it's
Thank
really
you.
a good deal.
Okay, any other questions for the administrator? Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. We will move on to item C, consent agenda, item 8 through 13B1. A motion by Supervisor Longenhan and second by Supervisor Zareni. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda, items 8 through 13B1? Any discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. Vice Chair McKinn, thank you, and we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. And we will move on to resolutions from item D, County Board of Supervisors. Just an announcement from the chair as it is listed on the agenda, an approval of the agreement to release the potential claims by administrator, resolution R-41-19. There is a request, or was a request by supervisor to present and have the opportunity to go in closed session. He has withdrawn that request, so but let's first take the motion to approve the agreement and release the potential claims by administrator, resolution R-41-19. Supervisor Rosenberg with the motion and Supervisor Butke with the second. Any discussion? And again, the motion to go into closed session has been withdrawn. Supervisor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to not be particularly long-winded, but I did have some concerns. And somebody asked me recently what I had against Administrator Carger. And I have to tell you, this is the only thing I have against Administrator Carger. As a matter of fact, he's been a pretty good friend. When I was in the hospital, he visited me. I was with him over to Minneapolis to see the Badgers pound on his Golden Gophers a number of times. I took him down to Madison to see the Badgers pound on his Golden Gophers a couple of times. But he got even on the golf course. However, I just think it's not right. As a matter of fact, I think it's downright borders on illegal, what our administrator is asking. The report that you have in front of you from our attorneys, they made a couple of important points. Because of Brad's unique position as administrator, his actions and speeches reflect an official position of the county. In other words, he was speaking for the county and not as a citizen. This participation in rhetoric and rally at the march were determined to be community perceptions of law enforcement at both the city, county, and state level. His comments undermined our judicial system. The messages from which Brad's actions helped speed up as a result of his action was that his actions gave the impression that the community was racist, law enforcement was racist, district attorney's office was racist, the whole judicial system was racist. I'm just going to read you the conclusion. I'm going to guess at what you have not read it, of the report that came from our attorneys. Brad Carger's speech and action on May 31, 2016, arguably conflicted with the unique responsibility entrusted in a Marathon County administrator to foster strong relationships with county government. Brad Carger's action amplified messaging the local law enforcement and criminal justice system treat among Americans differently, and implied that the local criminal justice system is corrupted by racial bias. Moreover, Brad Carger's speech and action appeared to promote one ethnic or minority group over another, which in itself may undermine the belief of other ethnic and minority groups that their county government is representing them fairly and equally. Brad Carger's actions may likely reverberate negatively within the Office of County Government for a long time, and at a minimum through September 6, 2016, at which time Dylan Young could be sentenced to 60 years in prison. Social media posts from residents inside and outside the Wausau community continue to be critical of the local criminal justice system, if not Wausau Marathon County as a whole, as its treatment of Dylan Young and among Americans. Not only has Brad Carger conduct helped to create a climate that casts such criticism on county governments, this is now a perception that Brad Carger does not believe that his familiar dictate that county officials represent the county applies to him. So all I can just say is I can't support the proposition to pay Brad back. What we did was solely within our realm, and he just kind of, I will tell you quite frankly, he saw an opposition, he saw a possibility to get back that money and keep it out of the, hopefully keep it out of the press and have us not incur large legal expenses. So I will vote no, but that's the extent I'm going to say on this. Thank you.
Supervisor Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be pretty brief. That whole scenario in 2016 was one of the biggest regrets of my short-lived political career, and I'm glad that I have an opportunity to vote to make it right. So I'll be voting in favor of $8,598.66. Thank you.
Supervisor Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't here in 2016, so when I read the report, I mean, I was, new stuff that I didn't know, but I just want to make a comment that I really think it was in bad taste that supervisors would request to have this report back up in, our packet. I mean, it's behind us. And it's in bad taste because we're opening wounds again. And this is not a referendum on the administrator or even, the young community that we have here in Wausau, whether it is the Black community or the Hmong American community. This is not what this resolution is about. So to put that back, to request to put that back into our packet, that was in bad taste.
Supervisor Gomes.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know how to ask you this, but I guess I'll just will. Would you consider the attorney Von Vriesen and Roper, would you, do you question whether they were correct in what they told us at the time? What's your personal view? Do you mind saying?
I've had several discussions, and even in the report, and in the report to this board, in the last term, we went through that report, and clearly that report and investigation addressed the issue. And they, meaning the attorneys, gave the position to this board that they were well within their right and well within the not violating the First Amendment rights of the administrator, and that was made clear to this board at that time. It was made clear, I think, at that time when this discussion came up and the administrator's suspension was brought up. I think there was a faction of the board that felt one way. There was a faction of the board that felt the other way. I think this was the ultimate compromise that this board came up with, was the suspension and the 30-day pay suspension. So there was, they have clearly, and if we want to ask that question, I do have the attorney, I have contacted the attorney, and they will be available to answer any specific questions that anybody has. I can get them on the phone if that is the desire of this board, want to ask those questions direct. But I know the response that he would say is the board took the action and was well within the right and did not, in their opinion, violate the First Amendment rights of the administrator.
Thank you.
Supervisor Stark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to correct a misimpression that by asking this information be put in the packet, that we're opening this back up. This was opened up by the administrator making a demand on us. So that's the reason we're talking about it now. We're responding to a demand. Secondly, I did have a call from a constituent that very vehemently opposed paying any money. They went through a lot of reasons, personal reasons, and reasons that were germane to the issue. And I explained to them how I was intending on voting, and my vote is premised primarily on my many years of handling litigated matters such as this. And based on what has gone forward so far, if this were pursued, the likelihood that it would cost tens, if not hundreds of times more than $8,000, I'm going to vote in favor of putting it to bed for $8,000 rather than us incurring 30, 40, 50, or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when I explained that to the constituent, they said, okay, I appreciate that, I understand, but would you do me this honor and just voice the fact that I vehemently disagree with paying the administrator any back money, but I understand why you're going to vote the way you are. Thank you.
Supervisor Langenhan.
Call the question.
Question's been called. 3 people remain on the queue, and we will proceed to those 3 people. Is there objection to question being called? Objection by Supervisor Rosenberg. So we will put the.
I'll ask if it's a motion and get a second.
Is that a motion? Sure. Is there a second to the motion of question being called? Second has been made. Okay. So there is no debate. We need a 2/3 majority to end debate, but the 3 individuals will still be recognized that were on the queue if the motion to call the previous question is approved. So we will proceed to vote. Aye vote will potentially end debate. A no vote will allow debate to continue. And this does require a 2/3 majority. Supervisor Beestrom and Supervisor Durham, if you could confirm. Thank you, and we'll proceed. It's not going to be 2/3. 2/3 of 35, 24. And the motion is defeated. 2/3 is 24 members. And so we're back at debate. and we will proceed with the three individuals that were previously on the queue. Supervisor Miller is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted, I forgot to mention that when I was talking before, that the report to the independent counsel to the Marathon County Board that I was referring to was actually reviewed by the executive committee. It was sometime after it was issued, at which time Administrator Karger was present. And he was given a copy of that and asked to read it and asked if he agreed with it. He agreed with it except for several small insignificant items which did not change any of the conclusions in the report. So Supervisor Krager did agree with the comments that are in the independent counsel's report. Thank you.
Supervisor Boots.
Let's put this to bed and please vote on this. I will not have a comment.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also received a couple calls from constituents with the same request that Supervisor Stark had, is not to vote for this. And I explained to them the same thing that Supervisor Stark did. The reason I was going to vote for it was to avoid possible litigation with our administrator. Now, I'm going to vote for this not to make things right. Things were made right in 2016 by that board. However, I don't want to rehash this. It's over with, and I think we just need to vote for this and move on so we can do some other important county business. Thank you.
Supervisor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we can have the corporate counsel, what happens in the future if we have disciplinary, for lack of terms, penalties that we give to whether it's a sheriff's department employee, a highway department employee? Will they have the same rights to come back and ask for the back pay eventually?
Well, each case is going to be handled on a case-by-case basis, but there are often claims that are brought forward against Marathon County by employees who have been disciplined. That happens. We are usually represented by our insurance company when those claims are made. This was a request that was made prior to actually any claim being made against Marathon County. But we did have the assistance of insurance counsel in terms of framing the release in this. So if a claim had been made, it would have been referred to, the request was referred to insurance counsel anyway. And that's how we deal with these kinds of claims. So people have a right to redress against a governmental entity for an improper discipline.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? This is just a simple majority. As the resolution states, the money is in the administrator's budget, and so we will not need a budget transfer. And so we will proceed to vote. Supervisor Schley, if you would vote, please. Okay. There we go. And confirm, please. There we go, and we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. We will move on to approving an amendment to the 2019 budget to transfer additional funds for capital reserves to pay costs incurred with respect to repair and reconstruction of the Marathon Jail, Resolution 42-19. Is there a motion? Motion by Supervisor Christensen and second by Supervisor Opel. First, let me, we'll give you a little bit. We have now some additional information on the actual costs to repair the jail facility. The shoring that was authorized by this board last month, or the last special meeting that this board had, was authorized at $584,000. The current and best estimate that we have that includes shoring and rental of the shoring materials through the end of the project is $304,000. And the estimate to do a permanent repair based on the engineer's design, including the insurance, is $1,500,000. Now, the other thing that everybody has to be aware of, what we have, or what was in the packet, is first off, let's understand, I have had calls, as some other supervisors have had calls, about why we are going out and doing this as an emergency, and rather than bid so we're doing it time and materials, if you will. We have got the best estimate that we've got from the engineers, and that is worst case scenario, $1.5 million. And they have given us a timeline of roughly 6 months to do the, 6 weeks to do the repairs. If we were to go to RFP, you have a timeline and a Gantt chart that was provided, and that Gantt chart shows that if we went to RFP, we would be looking at probably closer to March to do the actual physical repairs would be started in March. The delay doing the repair until March would cost the county an additional, let me get the number, $521,313. Now, where that number's coming from is the additional costs to house inmates out of county while that facility is unoccupiable. There's an additional cost of $121,313 to basically enclose the jail pylons that are currently exposed to the winter that have water lines, plumbing that would have to be enclosed so that they don't freeze. So if you choose to go to the delay, we would be looking at an additional $521,313. But in this resolution is we'll need an amendment to include the $1,500,000 for the permanent fix. Included in that resolution is $425,000. That's the additional operational costs that we have for out-of-county placements that the Sheriff's Department, or more specifically the Corrections Division, is incurring, and some inefficiencies that we have because of the facility unusable. The declaration that this board had made at the last meeting was that this was a declaration of an emergency, and per the statutes that the emergency would end when this board takes action to end that emergency. The definition in Black's dictionary says that and I'm paraphrasing, is if that facility is unusable, it is still an emergency. And so that is why this is still deemed an emergency, and why we want the authority of this board to move forward with the repair and permanent fix of the facility at the cost of roughly $1,500,000. Supervisor Boots.
I would like to request that I abstain. Could abstain, please?
Abstention granted. Supervisor Miller.
Mr. Chairman, I just had a question on what constitutes an emergency, so I think you answered that.
Okay.
So we had to do that to get away from the bid process?
That is correct. The statute spells out a process and a declaration that can be done if we're going to be repairing facilities or building facilities. It spells out that this board can declare that emergency, and that requirement of procurement through is in the last resolution through public bidding is not mandatory pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 59.52, Parent 29, Parent B, and Section 3.05, Parent 5, General Code of Ordinances for Marathon County for the repair or reconstruction of public facilities when damage or threatening damage thereto creates an emergency as determined by the resolution of the county board in which the public health or welfare of the county is endangered. So, and we have clearly met that requirement. Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'll start off with making that motion to amend under the whereas, under B, replace the TBD by county board in parents with $1,500,000.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Nutting. Is there any discussion on the amendment? The amendment is to include the $1,500,000 for the repair.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I just had a little follow-up with that. It's necessary we have to do this. There's no question about that. I would just had the question of whether or not we have a chance of recouping any of this from the general contractor who screwed up in the first place in the initial build. And from my understanding, did not build it to the standards that it was supposed to be built.
That is something that has been discussed in very, very minor, and we are keeping track of the costs. Okay. And we will do an evaluation at a future point as to whether or not there's any pursuit on any future litigation potential.
Right, and that is totally separate from the motion because we need to do this regardless of how it got there. It needs to be fixed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Supervisor Robinson with the discussion on the amendment.
It's more a point of clarification. I thought I heard you say that the 1.5 million included the 425,000.
Oh, no.
It does not, and that's my understanding.
It does not. Excuse me. It does not. The 1.5 is only for the permanent repair of the facility. The 425 is for, in addition, is for operations that are incurred because of yes. Supervisor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On the discussion on the amendment.
On the 1.5, no, I've got one on something else.
Okay. We have an amendment on the floor. Is there any further discussion on the amendment to include the $1,500,000 repair cost? Any additional discussion?
It's a majority.
Any further discussion? We're ready to vote, proceed to vote on the amendment. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, unanimous with one abstention. And now to the motion motion as amended. Any further discussion? Supervisor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to get the numbers right again, we're talking 584,000, 304,000.
No. The 584 was allocated by this board on the last resolution, and that cost has come in at less than the 584. It's projected now to cost 304.
Okay, then to come back to that, so it's 304,000, 1,500,000, plus 425,000. Those are the numbers?
Those are the numbers. Those are the best numbers that we have based on the information that we have. Plus, there would be the sum certain that was authorized for the engineering.
Right, okay.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any further discussion? This does require a 2/3 majority of the board because this is a budget transfer from reserves. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously with one abstention. Moving on to item E, Forestry Recreation Committee, Environmental Resources Committee, and Human Resources Finance and Property Committee. Item 16, purchase of the Kurzweil property for county forest, Resolution 44-19. Supervisor Langenheim with the motion and Supervisor Seifelt with the second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Seiler? And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Item E, 17, abolish one full-time assistant park and recreational manager, chief ranger, and create one full-time deputy sheriff, recreation and safety in the sheriff's office. Resolution 45-19. We have Supervisor Schaefer with the motion and Supervisor Pfeffrick with the second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Moving on to item F, Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee, Environmental Resources Committee, and Park Commission. Item 18, resolution to accept donation from the Wausau Area Pickleball, Inc. to construct 6 pickleball courts at Marathon County. Resolution 46-19. Supervisor Stark with the motion and Supervisor Johnson with the second. Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Without objection from the board, I would like to invite Mr. Nicholas Ockwick, who's a representative of the Central Wisconsin Convention and Visitor Bureau and the director of Badger State Games, to speak a little regarding the potential benefits of accepting this donation of constructing 6 pickleball courts.
Is there any objection by the board? Is there any objection? Seeing none? Welcome the individual. And if you would, please come up to the front and use the...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. In regards to the early topics, now we get to the real important one, pickleball. So obviously I'm the executive director or the operations director for the Badger State Games, and just as early as last week, we have held our Badger State Summer Games pickleball event, and it was in Oshkosh. And also for the Winter Games, we hold our Badger State Winter Games pickleball in Stevens Point. And I'd love to be able to host pickleball here, the tournaments for the Badger State Games here locally. A lot of reasons for that is there's a nice little economic impact that goes along with tournaments and the Badger State Games. And so You know, that involves, you know, for example, the tournament that we just had in Oshkosh. It was a 3-day event, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It involves overnight hotel stays, restaurant visits, maybe some visits to the brewery, and also gas stations and of the sort. So I do work closely with the Wausau Pickleball Club, which we have a fantastic group. As a matter of fact, some of the players did travel down to Oshkosh to be in the pickleball tournament. And so, again, pickleball, it's, maybe take a little poll here. How many of the board members, by raise of hand, have ever played pickleball? Don't be scared. You know, it's okay. We're just scared. Or if you've ever, you know, seen it on the pickleball channel, and that really is a pickleball channel. So this isn't going away. This is just this is big. This is actually the USA Pickleball Association predicted 4 million pickleball players here in the United States, and it will continue to increase. You know, we teach it now in the school system. It's all part of the Phi Ed programs. So that is a feeder program for future pickleball players. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about pickleball and the importance, and how with the Badger State Games and the Convention and Visitors Bureau, I'd love to see this additional stuff brought to the area. It's a benefit for all of Marathon County. It's a great sport. It's a physical activity that's low impact, but yet you get a tremendous workout. You know, everybody's looking at their Fitbits. I had a gentleman who said he competed in the tournament, and he looked down at his Fitbit, and it was equivalent to like, 10 miles that he was walking without even noticing it. But again, I just thought I'd say a few words. I want to thank, Lee Zhang for inviting me to come and say a few words as well. And but please, it's Nick, it's not Nicholas. It sounds like my wife yelling at me. So, Mr. Chairman, if anybody has any questions about pickleball or anything, I'm here.
Supervisor Gomes.
Why don't you make like a 5-minute video once, because we could all see what the.
You can go watch as many videos as you want on YouTube. Just
I don't have YouTube.
You know what? Come on down to Marathon Park or over to the Weston pickleball courts, and they'll gladly give you a paddle. And what I've been told is, once you play pickleball, you're back all the time. It's fun. It's a great sport. And again, it's like the Badger State Games. You can be 7 years old or 75 years old. All the different skill levels. They match you up with the skill level with everybody else. So it's fantastic.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Is winter pickleball played on snowshoes?
No, sir, it is not. It's indoors. You do play it indoors. For the Badger State Winter Games, we hold it down at Century World Tennis Courts. So just a little educational thing. So one tennis court, two pickleball courts can be developed with one tennis court. And there's actually some great revenue opportunities as well, some vertical revenue. You know, like the tennis courts down on River Drive. You know, there's tennis camps, tennis clinics. You can do the same thing with the pickleball courts. You could implement pickleball clinics. I know Jamie back there, you know, the Parks and Rec. I know the other Parks and Recs over in Fox Cities. They offer it to the youth programs as a revenue opportunity and in their youth programming.
Okay, Supervisor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to briefly mention I had been promising the pickleball club that I would go check it out, because I'm on the ERC and we were voting on this. If anyone has met my 4-year-old, she's very curious and precocious child. I took her with me. The pickleball people were awesome. They showed her how to play pickleball. They gave her her own racket. She got to take a ball home. They were just very welcoming and very excited to spread the joy of pickleball. So I have a special place in my heart now for the pickleball people.
Supervisor Schaefer.
Was this developed in America, or was it?
Yeah, it's actually a really old sport. 1965 is how long it's been around. But only the last 5 to 7 years has been the boom, because it was a baby boom. It was, you know, projected for the 55 and older crowd. It's huge down in Florida. You know, the warmer states, the Villages is like the world's largest pickleball campus, so to speak, because of all. But just in the last couple of years, it's actually 30 to 40-year-olds, and the young professionals are really getting into pickleball now. Not about the 4-year-olds, but yeah. So and again, because of the feeder program in the schools, the kids are all learning pickleball. It's relatively inexpensive. Again, you have a net, a couple paddles, and a wiffle ball. And again, I encourage anybody to go to YouTube or come down to Marathon Park or to Weston. We have a lot of nice pickleball courts in Marathon County. And so my challenge is it should be on everybody's bucket list to at least try pickleball once, because it's a nice exercise and it's a good time.
Okay, any other questions for Nick?
Call a question.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And Supervisor Seibert, please vote and confirm. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. And we will proceed to item G, Executive Committee, item number 19, special election not ordered to fill Marathon County Clerk vacancy position effective September 13, 2019, Resolution 47-19. Supervisor Schaefer with the motion and Supervisor Wagner with the second. Any discussion? Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some concerns with this, that we're going to take a process out of the hands of the people, and that does concern me to a great degree. We're going to be having a lot of elections in the next year. One more just came to light yesterday. Yeah, I don't know who that would be, Sarah, but so we're having a number of elections. We'll have the spring elections. We'll have primary elections. There's no shortage of election dates to hold a special election. And looking at the statute, it does allow for us to order a special election and have the assistant clerk take over duties until that election is held. So it wouldn't be unfilled. And we'd also have the benefit of having that assistant clerk, who I would assume has been in the office for a while, to oversee. So, but my gut concern is that we're taking this important decision on who's going to oversee our elections out of the hands of the people of Marathon County and putting it into the hands of 3, 4, 5 people in a committee. And I just don't think that's right. That's my concern with the issue. So I cannot support not holding a special election because I'd like to hear what folks in Marathon County have to say. Thank you.
Supervisor Seibert.
Thank you. I feel the clerk is one of the most underrated positions that we have. Anybody can't come off the street and do a successful job at what they do. I just think that the clerks run this county and they do a great job doing it. Without the clerks, we'd be lost with inexperienced clerks. And we've gone through this in our township. That inexperienced clerk cost us thousands and thousands of dollars because she didn't know what she was doing. So that's just my thoughts.
Supervisor Boots.
I was a town chair for about 10 years in the town of Texas, and about my 6th year in, we had an election where a clerk came in, and like Mr. Seibert said, she couldn't perform the duties and resigned. And we were faced with doing the same thing we're asking to do now and appoint someone. You're having 5 candidates that are qualified candidates coming in. They're going to know how to do this job. The elections, I'm totally against having special elections for no reason. These people will be doing a good job. You have 5 qualified candidates. And after this short term, you'll have a regular election and we'll move on.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's not a short time. It's not a short time at all. We're going to have a minimum of 4 elections that will be held under this person's whoever is in that position. And that's not inconsequential. And I used to tell, back when I was involved in partisan politics, I used to tell the groups I was speaking to that the next election is the most important one in your lifetime. And that's true of every election because it's the only one that counts. All the other ones are past, and this is the only one that's in front of us. And given the concerns that 17 intelligence agencies of this country have laid out about election security, I have concerns about not having a qualified person in there. So changing and appointing someone could open up this county to some problems. That concerns me, depending on who is appointed, whether the election runs smoothly. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of what degree people are going to try to mess with the election. Outside entities, I'm not talking about anything here, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And why would we go outside of our existing clerk's experience, outside of that office at this point? We can hold the special election. We can operate with the assistant clerk until that person is elected, and we do have to trust the citizens of Marathon County to elect a person who is competent and capable. And I have confidence in the electorate to do that. So I don't see a downside to holding the special election, keeping it in the hands of current employees, the current assistant clerk, and moving forward that way. I just think, again, it's the right thing to do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I would call on the clerk. The clerk's asked me to be able to address the board on this issue, and I have granted her that ability. So I will turn the mic over to the clerk.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Gibbs. I asked if I could address the board for just a minute regarding appointing or holding a special election. I just want to point out that if you go with a special election to be held for county clerk, the candidates would need to take out papers, circulate nomination papers, no less than 500, no more than 1,000, and start campaigning starting December 1st, 2019, with the filing deadline of January 7th, 2020. If a primary would be needed, it would be February 18th, 2020, and the spring election would be April 7th. Immediately following the spring April election, the county clerk on April 15th would need to, again, take out papers, circulate nomination papers, and no less than 500, no more than 1,000, and start campaigning for the partisan primary for August 11th, 2020, and the November 3rd, 2020 ballot, and filing that paperwork by June 1st, 2020. I believe those that applied for the position are involved in the election process and would also be preparing for the county's 4, possibly 5 elections, and campaigning and running for the office at the same time. I ask you to vote for the appointment rather than calling for a special election, and allow the new county clerk to get acclimated to the office prior to having to run for the fall election. As they did with the county board did when they filled the vacancy of the also important position of the Marathon County Treasurer held by Lorraine Beyersdorf several years ago. And I thank you for listening.
Supervisor Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been thinking a lot about this. I don't love the appointment process. I wish that we had more information about the candidates so we knew what their experience was. Again, I trust Nan. I know that you have the county's best interest, and if you think these people are qualified, but I still, there's something that it bugs me that we're going around the vote of this constitutional office. And I guess I still kind of don't know how I'm going to vote on this. I don't like the concept of this appointment. I would much rather have an election. So I guess that's where I'm at.
I would just point out that obviously the framers of the statutes of the state of Wisconsin provide for this. And I would also mention that we had 45 candidates apply. The HR department provided you with the criteria that was utilized to screen the candidates down to 5 qualified candidates that have run elections in this county in previous terms, in previous positions. Excuse me, one of those candidates has run elections in another county, not Marathon County. However, they are all qualified candidates that the team of individuals that are on the screening are looking at. They includes the deputy administrator, the chair, the vice chair, the HR director, the assistant HR person, and the clerk, all set on the interviews, and we will come forward with a name from those 5 candidates of a qualified individual that will be up to this board to approve. So ultimately, it's still this board's approval to fill that unexpired term. Moving on, Supervisor Boots.
I would like to just thank Nan for that clarification, and who better to tell us what to do than the clerk right now?
Supervisor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You actually answered one of my questions. I was curious if Nan had kind of sat in and reviewed some of the applications coming in. Because again, kind of echoing what a lot of people have said, I think that Nan would be a perfect person to kind of screen them. But I did have a second question, luckily for everyone. Just curious if we've had an instance in the past where we ended up having a vacancy in this position and how we filled it at that point, if we ever have.
Not for the clerk position. Nan's been in that 48 years. Oh, maybe not quite 48 years. She's worked for the county, but she's been in the clerk position 23. We have had a vacancy in an elected position during my tenure on the board, and that was the treasurer's position, and that the elected treasurer resigned and retired, and we went through this exact same process, took out applications, screened the applications, had basically the same committee. In this case, instead of Nan, it was the prior treasurer that sat on the interview panel and brought forward the name to this board for its ratification and approval to fill the unexpired term of the treasurer that had retired.
All right, thank you.
Supervisor Langenhan.
I think this is working now. Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to review some of the information that Nan had brought up a few moments ago. Nan, when is the earliest, the absolute earliest that a special election could take place, assuming that candidates would go out, get their signatures, and assuming no primary?
The statute is clear. The statute calls for that election to be, depending on when the vacancy takes place, that election would be the April 7th election of 2020. It corresponds with this county board supervisors election also.
Okay. Second question for Nan. Thank you for the clarification. Nan, how many employees do you have just in your office? You have 3 under you, not including yourself. Okay.
4. There's 4 in
Yep.
the office, 3 underneath Nan.
So for those of you that are somewhat familiar with myself, my first job out of college was being a deputy clerk treasurer for a city in Marathon County. And there was a time period where I did not have my clerk present, and I was responsible for doing a lot of the clerk's duties, and it was something like, I think 2 months total I spent without a clerk. And I had to do that on my own, and it's not a fun process when you have to step in and fill shoes, when you're somewhat unfamiliar with where you're going and you have to steer the ship. So I guess in regards to what's on the table in front of us, rather than leaving those employees uncertain, I would rather fill the position with someone we know who's going to be qualified, who can steer the ship. So I would support the resolution that's on the table as is.
Supervisor Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I'm Hmong, and my family comes from a country where, they were not, they couldn't vote. And so that's why, for me, elections are very important to me because they're the pinnacle of freedom in our country here. So I just think that if someone really wants this clerk position, they're going to work for it, and they're going to work for the votes of Marathon County residents to vote for them. And so, that's why I can't support this resolution, and I'll be voting no on it. Thank you.
Supervisor Johnson, third and final time.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question. If this resolution passes, will the board be provided information regarding the 5 candidates? And the reason I ask that is I don't want to run into a situation where the board is in the dark on who the 5 candidates are, and then we have one name dropped on us with a recommendation, because I think it is our duty, since we're approving this, to take a look ahead of time. I know it falls to the committee to make a recommendation, but I think as board supervisors who are making the ultimate decision on whether this person is appointed or not, we should have information regarding the 5 candidates as if this resolution passes. I think that would be very helpful going forward. That way you would get informed votes from your county board supervisors. Thank you.
Well, first off, just so everybody is clear, these interviews are not done in the dark. They are a policy of the committee, and they're open to everyone. Every county board supervisor can attend those interviews if they so desire, and they start tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. And they are at 10, 11, and 1 and 2. There was one interview that was held today. And I don't have an answer to that other question. Supervisor McEwen, Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You answered one of the questions as far as I believe the interviews were open to the public, and I know there were a couple other supervisors that were there today for the one interview that we had. And as far as appointing this person, we're elected officials, and sometimes we have to make decisions like this. So it's not like the public is not getting a vote. You're gonna ultimately okay this position. We can bring you a name, however, it has to be okayed by this board. So, and I do agree with Supervisor Boots that we need somebody in there that's going to be able to operate. We do have a lot of elections coming up, and I would feel much more comfortable with somebody in there that's familiar with elections and that everything is done right. So I would ask that you vote for this resolution. Thank you.
And back to answering Supervisor Johnson's question, we have to look into that as to before whether or not all of their qualifications of all of the candidates that are interviewed are provided to this board. But clearly, the interviews themselves are open to the public. They're open to any board member. They're open to the general public. At this point, but whether or not they're finalists and whether or not the other 4 candidates that the committee does not bring forward is brought to this board for their full vetting, I don't have an answer to that question. Supervisor Seibert.
Just one more thought. I don't know, over the last 10 years or so, how many county supervisors have we appointed to this board because of retirement or people moving out of the area that didn't go through any election? Thank you.
Supervisor Zhang.
You answered my question. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Are we ready to vote? We will proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Moving on to Infrastructure Committee, H, Infrastructure Committee, item 20, Marathon County Controlled Access Rights, County Road R, Town of Rib Mountain, Resolution R-48-19. Supervisor Robinson with the motion and Supervisor Opal with the second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Moving on to ordinances, under item number I, 21, to create section 2.05 XX, County Administrator Recruitment Task Force, Resolution 0-15-19. Motion by Supervisor Zareni and second by Supervisor Stark. Is there any discussion? Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question for for either yourself or the executive committee. But why is it that the one of the membership or the county board member is limited to it's limited to a county board member in their first term?
The comments that I had heard is that that the young supervisors were left out of the process, and so the process was thought to include, again, this is a task force. It is charged with specific duties and bringing back recommendations to the executive committee. It is also not the interview panel, so that is also going to be a different, potentially different makeup. And that task force will be bringing forward qualified candidates for a second interview that the executive committee will be interviewing. So the rationale was to include one supervisor from the first term. Supervisor Gomes.
Same question.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Zhang.
So just to seek clarification, this task force would just be to oversee the recruitment and selection of the county administrator, but there's going to be an interview panel that's going to interview the candidates. Am I understanding that correct?
Correct.
And I know it's not part of the, obviously, task force here, but how would the interview panel be selected?
That's going to be one of the recommendations to the from the task force to the executive committee to make its decision on how it chooses that interview panel.
The only reason why I'm saying this is I think we need to be inclusive of other individuals as well. I know you mentioned that we need to be inclusive of young individuals on this task force, but I want to make sure that the Latino community, the Hmong community as well, also gets their input as well when we're choosing an administrator.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. And moving on to announcements and/or requests, miscellaneous items. Any announcements and/or requests? Clerk has announcements.
I need signatures from the executive committee, board members, forestry, recreation, environmental resources, human resources, finance and property, park commission, and Supervisor Seibert.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the other supervisors that are on the Rules Review Committee, there was a doodles thing, or what you call it, out there, survey, asking you to select days for us to have our first meeting. So if you could finish that up, there's a couple that hadn't responded to it yet. But it looks like it looks like the 18th of September, if that worked for the other, I think 2 that didn't respond. But just if you could get that in and we could get that set up. And just to invite the entire county board that if you want to come to those Rules and Reviews Committee, it would invite everybody to be there. So we'd like to take everybody's input. Thank you.
Okay, any other announcements? Okay, the Corp Council has whispered in my ear that we think that we will be able to release those applicants and the qualifications, but we will verify that and clarify that in the future. Okay, any other announcements? I will accept that motion. Supervisor Opal had his hand up really fast. He wants to go home, and Supervisor Seefeld seconded it. So any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.